There's a person in your life who doesn't use social media. Maybe they never really explained why. Maybe you assumed they were just private. Maybe you quietly pitied them for being disconnected. I need you to consider something uncomfortable. That person, the one you pitied, might be the most financially and psychologically free person you know. And the rest of us, the connected ones, the ones with the followers and the feeds and the carefully curated digital lives, we might be the ones who are actually lost. Not dramatically lost, not obviously lost, quietly lost, in ways that show up in our spending, our decisions, our relationships, and the persistent feeling that no matter what we do, we're somehow still behind. This video is about that feeling, where it comes from, who profits from it, and what it's actually costing you. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you won't be thinking about social media. You'll be thinking about yourself. Let's start with something nobody told you when you made your first account. Social media was not built for you. It was built from you. From the patterns of human psychology that researchers spent decades documenting, the need for belonging, the sensitivity to social rejection, the compulsive drive to know where we stand relative to others, those weren't bugs in the human operating system that technology accidentally triggered. They were the features that got deliberately targeted. The engineers who built these platforms didn't stumble onto addiction. They engineered it systematically, using the same behavioral psychology frameworks used to design slot machines. The variable reward schedule, the not knowing whether this refresh will bring something exciting or nothing, is the same mechanism that keeps people feeding coins into machines in windowless casinos at 3 a.m. The casino doesn't have windows for a reason. Your feed doesn't have a clock for a reason. Now think about the last time you opened your phone without meaning to, not a conscious decision, just a reflex. Hand moved before thought arrived, screen unlocked before you even registered wanting to check it. That wasn't you making a choice. That was a conditioned response, trained into your nervous system through thousands of repetitions by a system that profits from your automatic behavior. And here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. That same automatic, pre-conscious behavior pattern doesn't stay in the app. It migrates. It rewires how you make decisions across every domain of your life, including financial ones. The person who checks their feed reflexively is also the person who checks their portfolio reflexively during a market dip, panic reads financial Twitter, and makes reactive decisions dressed up as informed ones. The automation trained into you by social media doesn't clock out when you close the app. It runs in the background of every choice you make. Here's what's actually happening in your brain. Every like, every comment, every notification, your brain processes that as a social reward and releases a small pulse of dopamine in response. Enough to feel good, not enough to feel satisfied, just enough to make you want more. This is not a metaphor. This is measurable neurochemistry. And here's where it gets personal. You post something. Maybe you're proud of it. Maybe it's something real, something that actually matters to you. And then you wait. 10 minutes later, you check. 30 minutes later, you check again. And if the response is slower than you hoped, there's a feeling. Small, a little hollow. Not devastation, just a quiet deflation that you probably don't even consciously register before you've already started scrolling to fill it. You've done that. Most people reading this have done that, not because there's something wrong with you, because the system worked exactly as designed. Now here's the part that nobody connects to this. People who don't use social media are not immune to wanting validation. They still want it. They've just learned to source it internally, from finishing something, from doing something well, from their own quiet assessment of their own progress. And that internal sourcing mechanism is one of the most powerful financial traits a person can have. because the investor who needs the market to validate their thesis every single day, who checks prices compulsively and adjusts positions based on daily movement, that person will consistently underperform the investor who sources their confidence internally and holds through noise. The psychological pattern is identical. Where you source your validation determines whether you hold or panic, whether you build or perform building. Psychologists call this intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, but here's what they don't put in the textbooks. Extrinsic motivation has a fee attached to it. You pay that fee every time you need external confirmation to feel okay. You pay it in anxiety, in compulsive checking, in spending money on things that function as social signals rather than genuine value, things that only make sense if someone is watching. Think about the last significant purchase you made that you were genuinely excited to tell people about. Now ask yourself, how much of the excitement was about having the thing, and how much was about the telling? That gap, that specific gap between the thing and the telling, that's where an enormous amount of human wealth silently disappears. Now we need to talk about the thing social media does that causes the most damage and gets discussed the least honestly. It's not screen time, it's not distraction, it's not even addiction in the clinical sense. It's the systematic destruction of your ability to accurately assess your own life. Every time you open a feed, your brain runs an automatic comparison process. It's not optional. It's not something you can think your way out of. It's a social primate brain doing what social primate brains evolved to do, scanning the group, locating yourself in the hierarchy, assessing threats and opportunities. The problem is that your brain evolved to do this with a tribe of 150 people, whose actual lives you could observe, not with a curated performance broadcast by 500 million people who only show you the moments that made them look good. Your brain cannot tell the difference. It processes a stranger's highlight reel with the same circuitry it would use to assess a real person's real life, and it recalibrates your sense of normal accordingly. You open your phone on a Tuesday. You're doing fine, nothing catastrophic, life is okay, and then you see it. Someone you went to school with, they just announced something, a launch, a promotion, a move, a milestone, and something shifts. Not jealousy exactly, something more insidious, a quiet recalculation, a sudden awareness that the distance between where you are and where you're supposed to be has grown without you noticing. You put the phone down, but the recalibration doesn't reverse. It stays. It colors the rest of your day, the rest of your week sometimes. Your own life, which felt adequate 10 minutes ago, now carries this faint residue of not enoughness that you can feel but can't locate. That feeling is not an accident. It is a designed output of a system that profits from your dissatisfaction, and its financial consequences are enormous. Social comparison is one of the strongest documented predictors of unnecessary consumer spending. When your brain's baseline for normal gets recalibrated upward by a constant feed of other people's peaks, things you never needed start to feel like deficits you need to address. The kitchen renovation that suddenly feels urgent, the car that feels embarrassing by comparison, the vacation that feels mandatory because 3 people you follow just went. You're not making those decisions from genuine desire. You're making them from a manufactured deficit feeling that an algorithm created and your nervous system interpreted as a personal conclusion. The distinction matters enormously because one of those you can examine, the other just feels like reality. A study from the University of Pennsylvania found that limiting social media to 30 minutes a day significantly reduced depression and loneliness. But people who didn't use it at all showed something more striking, not just lower anxiety, but a fundamentally different relationship to their own sense of progress. They weren't comparing, not because they were incurious or indifferent, but because they'd removed the machine that was running the comparison process automatically against their interests dozens of times a day. They opted out of the arena entirely. And when you're not in the arena, you can finally hear yourself think. There's a specific finding in neuroscience that I need you to actually absorb, not just hear, absorb. Heavy social media use measurably reduces activity in the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is not one function among many. It is the biological infrastructure for everything we consider rational human behavior. Long-term planning, impulse control, the ability to weigh future consequences against present temptation, the capacity to pause between stimulus and response and choose deliberately instead of react automatically. It is, in the most literal neurological sense, the thing that makes you capable of making good decisions, and habitual social media use weakens it, not as a metaphor, on brain scans, measurably. Now, sit with that for a moment, because it means that the behavior pattern most people treat as harmless background activity is quietly degrading the cognitive hardware most critical to their financial lives, their relationship decisions, their career judgment, and their ability to think clearly about what they actually want. It's 11 p.m. You're in bed. You told yourself you'd just check one thing. That was 40 minutes ago. Now you're watching a thread about an investment opportunity. The comments are excited. Someone you've seen before, who seems credible, is explaining why this moves next week. And something in you starts doing math. Not careful math, excited math. The kind where you're already calculating the upside before you've seriously examined the risk. Your prefrontal cortex is supposed to interrupt that process. It's supposed to say, slow down, examine this. What do you actually know here versus what do you want to be true? But that interrupt function has been getting weaker, daily, through thousands of sessions of trained impulsivity, scroll, react, that have been reconfiguring your neural response patterns for years. The financial consequences of this are not dramatic and visible, they're subtle and cumulative. 1,000 small decisions made with slightly less deliberation than they deserved, a pattern of reacting to market noise instead of ignoring it, a consistent inability to hold a long-term position through short-term discomfort because the same brain that can't stop checking the feed can't stop checking the portfolio. People who stay off social media are, without any financial education prompting them, doing daily resistance training for the exact cognitive muscle that separates generational wealth builders from people who are always almost there. Before we go further, I need to ask you something directly. Some people avoid social media because they've genuinely examined it and decided it doesn't serve them. They've weighed what it offers against what it costs and made a clear-eyed decision. But some people avoid it, or want to, for a different reason. Because they're afraid of what would happen if they showed up, afraid of being judged, afraid of being seen and found lacking, afraid that the comparison machine would confirm what they're already worried is true about themselves. That's not freedom. That's the same wound wearing a different outfit. And the reason it matters is this. The goal isn't to leave social media. The goal is to understand the psychology clearly enough that you can make decisions, financial, personal, relational, that are actually yours, not reactions, not compensations, not performances. Yours. So which is it for you? Are you drawn to this idea because you've recognized something that doesn't serve you, or because there's a part of you that's afraid to be measured? That's not a rhetorical question. Sit with it. For people who've genuinely opted out, something interesting happens that I don't think gets described accurately. It's not that they become minimalists. It's not that they detach from the world or stop caring about success or money or progress. It's that they stop confusing performance with progress. Social media has turned the act of living into a production. Every experience carries an implicit question: is this shareable? Every milestone arrives pre-formatted for announcement. Every achievement feels slightly incomplete until it's been witnessed. And people who've stepped away from that have discovered something that sounds simple but is actually radical. A thing can be real without an audience. Your progress is real, even if nobody's watching it. Your financial growth is real, even if you never posted about it. Your life is happening, fully, completely, consequentially, whether or not it's being documented. That sounds philosophical until you realize it has a direct financial application. The investor who needs to announce their positions is a worse investor than the one who doesn't, not because sharing is wrong, but because the need to perform investment behavior introduces a psychological cost that degrades decision quality. You hold positions longer than you should because you've publicly committed to them. You take risks that make better stories than returns. You optimized for the appearance of financial sophistication rather than its substance. The best investors in the world, the ones with 30-year track records that compound quietly, are almost universally people you've never heard of, not because they failed to build a platform, because they never needed one. The average person spends 2.5 hours a day on social media, 912 hours a year, 38 full days. I want you to make that personal. Don't let it be a statistic. Think about last year. Think about the thing you kept saying you'd get to, the financial plan you needed to sit down and actually build, the investment account you kept meaning to open, the book that would have actually changed something if you'd read it, the conversation with yourself, the honest, quiet one about where you are and where you want to be that kept getting postponed because there was always something else pulling at your attention first. Where did the time go? It went into a feed, spent in 2-minute increments, given to content you cannot recall a single piece of right now. And the damage isn't just the lost knowledge, it's the lost decisions, the investment that never got started because the activation energy was never quite there, the financial habit that never formed because the mental space it needed was perpetually occupied. Vanguard's research is consistent. Investor behavior is the primary determinant of long-term financial outcomes, not market selection, not timing, behavior. And behavior is downstream of attention, which means attention is the foundational financial variable that almost nobody is managing deliberately. Let's talk about FOMO properly, because it's more serious than the word suggests. Fear of missing out isn't just social anxiety. It is a financial vulnerability that costs people measurable, documented money in every single market cycle. Here's what it looks like in practice. Something starts getting attention, not in a financial newspaper, in your feed. People are talking about it. The tone is a specific combination of excitement and urgency. Someone you respect has a position. Someone you follow is explaining why this is different. The comments are a mix of people who got in early celebrating and people asking if it's too late, which itself creates pressure because nobody wants to be the person asking that question. And something happens in your chest that isn't analysis. It's the fear of being the only one who watched from the outside. That feeling is not an investment thesis. It is FOMO wearing financial clothing, and it is the single most documented cause of retail investor losses across every speculative cycle in modern market history. The people who lost most in crypto, in meme stocks, in every trend that went mainstream, they weren't uninformed. They were informed people whose social circuitry overwhelmed their analytical circuitry at the exact worst moment. The brain trained by years of social media to treat viral attention as signal, that brain is not equipped to distinguish between something genuinely valuable and something that merely feels urgent because everyone is talking about it. People who've removed themselves from that training have developed something rare, the ability to be genuinely indifferent to financial consensus. They don't move because the crowd moved. They move because they decided to move. In markets, across every time horizon, that distinction determines everything. Here's the truth that the entire business model depends on you never fully understanding. The platforms need you to feel inadequate, specifically, persistently, and just below the threshold of conscious awareness. Because the moment you feel genuinely enough, satisfied, settled, not behind, you close the app. You go live your life. You stop generating the engagement that the advertising model runs on. So the algorithm ensures you never quite get there. It shows you just enough aspiration to keep you reaching, just enough achievement from others to keep you feeling behind, just enough controversy to keep you emotionally activated. The feed is calibrated by systems more sophisticated than anything you have access to keep you in a specific emotional state, engaged but unsatisfied, connected but lonely, informed but anxious. And you walk around in that emotional state all day. You make decisions in it, including financial decisions. And a person making financial decisions from a chronic, low-grade state of inadequacy and anxiety makes systematically different choices than a person making them from a baseline of sufficiency and clarity. They spend more on signals and less on substance. They save less because saving requires believing your future is worth investing in. They take worse risks because they're chasing a feeling of catching up rather than executing a strategy. They are, in the language of behavioral finance, perpetually loss-averse in ways that prevent wealth accumulation, not because they're unintelligent, but because their emotional baseline has been engineered against them. Leaving social media doesn't just improve mood, it restores the emotional conditions under which rational financial behavior is actually possible. There's a finding in cognitive psychology that I want you to sit with. When you document an experience for an audience, when you're in photo mode, caption mode, story mode, you remember the experience less clearly afterward. Not slightly less, significantly less. Because memory consolidation requires presence. It requires your full processing resources to be directed at the experience itself. And when half of your cognitive bandwidth is managing the performance of the experience, framing it, evaluating it for shareability, anticipating the response, your brain doesn't fully encode what's actually happening. You were there, but you weren't there. The photo exists, the memory doesn't. Not fully, not in the way it would have if you just let it happen to you completely. People who don't use social media are building actual memories, full ones. They're having experiences that belong entirely to them, not to an audience, not to an algorithm, not to a metric. And there's a financial dimension to this that's subtle but real. People who live fully in their own experiences rather than performing them develop a clearer, more accurate sense of what they actually value. And knowing what you actually value, as opposed to what you've been conditioned to perform valuing, is the foundation of every sound financial decision. You can't build a financial life around your genuine priorities if you've never been still enough to identify them without the noise of social performance telling you what they should be. Social media is a tool. I won't pretend otherwise. For some people, it genuinely serves something real. Community, income, creative distribution, connection across distance. If that's true for you, authentically true, this isn't an argument for deletion. But I want to ask you something that most content about this topic doesn't ask. Not should you leave social media, but are you actually choosing to be there? Because there's a difference between using a tool and being used by one. And most people, if they're honest, cannot clearly articulate the last time they made a conscious decision to open the app rather than just finding themselves already in it. That automatic quality, the not quite choosing, is the clearest signal that the tool is running you rather than the other way around. And here's the financial parallel that nobody draws clearly enough. The same absence of conscious choice that characterizes compulsive social media use also characterizes the financial lives of most people. They're not making deliberate decisions about spending, saving, and investing. They're responding to social signals, to emotional states, to manufactured urgency, to the comparison baseline their feed has been quietly calibrating for years. The move from reactive to deliberate in social media use, in financial behavior, in life, requires the same thing: the willingness to pause, to notice the automatic behavior before acting on it, to ask, is this actually what I would choose? That pause is worth more than any financial product, any investment strategy, any optimization framework, because all of those things require a mind that can actually choose, and that mind has to be cultivated deliberately, against considerable opposition, in a world that profits from your automaticity. People who don't use social media are not better than you. They haven't discovered a secret. They haven't achieved some elevated state of consciousness that's unavailable to everyone else. They've made a decision, one specific, clear-eyed decision that most people keep postponing because the cost of it feels too high and the benefit feels too abstract. They decided that their attention, their actual, finite, irreplaceable, non-renewable attention, is worth more than what the feed offers in return. And in a world where the most sophisticated technology ever built is deployed at scale specifically to capture and monetize that attention, that decision is not passive. It is not simple. It is not obvious. It is, quietly, an act of profound self-possession. Because everything compounds. Your attention compounds into knowledge, clarity, skill, judgment, or it fragments into reaction, noise, comparison, and the chronic low-grade anxiety of a mind that's never fully anywhere. Your money compounds into freedom, options, security, and the ability to make choices from strength rather than fear. Or it disperses into status signals, reactive purchases, and the financial equivalent of running in place while believing you're moving forward. The people who protect their attention and the people who build genuine wealth are, more often than not, the same people. Not because financial discipline produces psychological discipline, but because they're both expressions of the same underlying capacity, the ability to delay gratification, resist social pressure, think in long time horizons, and trust your own judgment over the noise of consensus. That capacity doesn't come from a course or a strategy. It comes from the daily practice of choosing deliberately. And you cannot practice choosing deliberately if a system has been trained your brain toward automatic response. You're not weird for wanting clarity. You're not antisocial for protecting your attention. You're not behind. You never were. That feeling was installed, and now you know where it came from. The question isn't whether you'll delete the app. The question is whether, from this moment, you'll notice the automatic behavior before it makes decisions for you. That noticing, that single, consistent pause between stimulus and response, is where your financial life, your real life, and your actual self begin. This is not a video about social media. It never was. It's a video about who you are when nobody's watching, and whether that person is making the decisions or just reacting to the ones already being made for them.